Mr. Speaker, I rise to make my contribution to Budget 2016. And Mr. Speaker, I rise with a sense of disappointment. And I am sure majority of Guyanese must be feeling the same way. Mr. Speaker, before I go into my main presentation, I want to just respond to a few points that the Honorable Member, the Honorable Minister within the Ministry of Housing just raised. And Mr. Speaker, if there is one program, if there is one success story of the PPP civic government, it was housing. Mr. Speaker, 23 years ago when we took over this government, before 2015, May 11, there was no Ministry of Housing. $1 was budgeted for the Ministry of Housing. And Mr. Speaker, in 1993, the PPP Civic started a systematic program of housing, and as a result, over 190,000 Guyanese were able to own their own homes. So, Mr. Speaker, we should not come into this honorable house with rhetoric when you belong to a party that destroyed the housing sector in this country. Mr. Speaker, we should give kudos and say we'll improve the sector, not come and criticize it, because every single region you go in this country, there are dozens of housing schemes that went up. And Mr. Speaker, I can speak for an area where there is a vibrant, good housing scheme, and that is Bloomfield. I belong to Bloomfield. That was wasteland. And today, Mr. Speaker, hundreds of people, hundreds of young Guyanese are living there in a modern housing scheme. And Mr. Speaker, I can go on and on. I can go on and on and rebut the honorable member. I can tell the honorable member, because when you come here, must come with a program. Don't say we will give affordable housing to people. How we'll do it? How we'll do it? And we have shown, Mr. Speaker, we have shown over the last 23 years when we were in government that we deliver, and we deliver to young Guyanese in this country. Mr. Speaker, as I said, many Guyanese were expecting that in 8 months, Guyana would have been in overdrive. But, Mr. Speaker, as I speak here today, a large percentage of those who supported this government in the last elections are not only disappointed, but are hopelessly disillusioned. Mr. Speaker, they are angry. They are angry with themselves that they have voted the way they did after looking at this economy here today. Mr. Speaker, today hopelessness and despair has taken over this beautiful country. A country that has seen phenomenal development over the last 23 years prior to May 11, 2015. Mr. Speaker, this government is about to finish 9 months. And what is their achievement? All they are doing is having a bunch of commission of inquiries and forensic audits filled with insinuation of wrongdoings and scandalous outbursts from a bunch of top-heavy bureaucrats. And Mr. Speaker, they have no moral right to talk about corruption in this house, because we give them a chance a few days ago to make every single member of parliament income tax declaration public, and they refused and voted against it. So they have no moral right to come to this house and talk about corruption, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when one looks at this budget theme, stimulating growth, restoring confidence, the good life beckons, it is very, very misleading. Mr. Speaker, this budget has once again failed to address the welfare, needs, and concern of the poor and ordinary people of this country. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Minister of Finance has done an excellent job in giving an overview of what this nation can expect. But let's be practical, Mr. Speaker. Let's be practical. Flowery language resonate with applause would not take out Guyana of its present economic crisis. And we had a lot of flowery language during the budget presentation, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am putting it to this honorable House that Guyana is in a state of retrogression. The economy is flattening, and the business sector is in a state of uncertainty, Mr. Speaker. Whilst all this is going on, the people are suffering, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, even their own supporters, Mr. Speaker, as I said, are disappointed that all the talks of a good and green life was nothing but a sleight of hand to fool them. Their own supporters, Mr. Speaker, are today experiencing the economic crisis, and they are criticizing this government. And if a poll should have taken today, Mr. Speaker, they will lose a lot of grounds now. Mr. Speaker, as I said, Guyana has taken a nosedive downhill. Mr. Speaker, is this budget going to turn things around? And the answer, Mr. Speaker, is a big emphatic no. It's a big emphatic no. Why? Because it cannot turn things around, Mr. Speaker, because the measures in it are harsh, and it will become burdensome. It will come burdensome on the back of the Guyanese people. Mr. Speaker, let us look at one of the measures. For example, let us look at the proposed ban on used tires. Mr. Speaker, today in this country, more than 90% of taxi, hire car, and minibus drivers purchase used tires. An average cost, Mr. Speaker, for a used tire is about $4,000. Mr. Speaker, with the intended ban, these people will have to find approximately $20,000 to purchase a new tires. If the government had this foresight, with the downturn in the economy, every single way you turn, Mr. Speaker, you go to Regent Street, you go to Stabrook Market, you go to Border Market, you go to Portman Market. Every single way you turn, every business community you go to, Mr. Speaker, people are lamenting about the economic crisis in this country. Mr. Speaker, Port Morant is one of the largest open-air markets in the Caribbean. That market used to commence early in the morning, about 1 o'clock in the morning, and used to end by 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Mr. Speaker, I know for a fact that many times you want to traverse that roadway, you have to take a lot of time to traverse it. And Mr. Speaker, I am challenging you and challenging this House now that if you go there around 10:30 in the day, the market is clear. That shows a signal, that is sending a message that people don't have money to go and purchase. Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member, I know you will want to leave the Speaker out of the challenge.
All right.
Let us try not to allow our thinking and the expressions we use to get the better of us. The Speaker would wish to remain where he is.
All right.
Please
Thank you,
proceed.
Mr. Speaker, and I would leave you out of the challenge. Mr. Speaker, as I was saying, that the cost for new tires now will be passed on to the consumers. And who are the vulnerable groups? The vulnerable groups are the school children and pensioners. Remember, Mr. Speaker, when the minister presented his budget, he boasted that for the first time in less than a year, pensioners are enjoying an increase of 38.7%. Mr. Speaker, he failed to minus He failed to minus the 2-year consecutive subsidies for water and electricity. And you take out the subsidies and see what the pensioner will receive. He failed also, Mr. Speaker, the honorable member. The honorable member, Minister Jordan, failed to tell this honorable house that they took away the school children grant, cash grant. Mr. Speaker, and then the honorable member come into this honorable house and say a good life beckons. How a good life can beckon when you take away benefits that the populace were enjoying, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, none country in this world, any party go to the people and campaign. When they get into office, they try to improve what the people were receiving. They are not going to take away, and this government taking away benefits that the PPP Civic government have given to the people, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to turn my time because my colleagues over this side of the House already spoke about the draconian measures in the budget. And I know for a fact that over the court.
Honourable members, it is courteous to allow the Speaker to speak without interruption. I believe that some honourable members do not realize that their voices carry, and that the Speaker is disturbed by their exchanges. So let us try to be courteous, if nothing else. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I was saying that over the course of the budget debate, more of these measures, more of these draconian measures will be debated by our side of the House. But I want to touch, Mr. Speaker, on some development in the regions of this country. Mr. Speaker, I want to deal, as I said, with these issues. And before I go into the real issue, I want to say the records of our party, the PPP Civic government, in regional development is a proud one. During its 23 years in office, we have seen exceptional transformation in all the regions of Guyana. Every citizen, Mr. Speaker, were given equal opportunities to benefit from government's intervention. Mr. Speaker, what we are witnessing today, Mr. Speaker, unlike what is happening today, we have already seen the new government started to take control of regional development centrally. Mr. Speaker, they have removed suitable, qualified, competent, and experienced persons as REO. These persons perform their duties with professionalism and due diligence. Mr. Speaker, what we have for replacement? We have people who are found to be unsuitable, people who lack experience, and people with hardly any qualification. Mr. Speaker, imagine that a bush doctor become an REO for a region. Imagine that, Mr. Speaker, right? So the standard, Mr. Speaker, the standard of the regional administration, the regional development, they are now being stifled. Mr. Speaker, this government is using REOs as political lackeys to do their political works, usurping the roles and function, Mr. Speaker, of elected bodies and officials. These practices are taking place especially in those 7 regions that the PPP Civic has won. Mr. Speaker, some of the action of these REOs they are refusing. Imagine I am a regional chairman, Mr. Speaker. I am like a governor for a state in the United States, and the REO, the CEO of a region, refusing to meet with me. That REO should be fired immediately, Mr. Speaker, if this government wants to uphold standards. Mr. Speaker, they are refusing to meet with the regional chairman and vice chairman. They are not submitting reports, example, financial reports. And I will come to that just now and tell you how much money has come back to the Treasury, Mr. Speaker, because of that. Mr. Speaker, They are not attending statutory meeting. They have no respect for the RDC. They are sending them DREOs instead. Mr. Speaker, another thing, very petty, they are limiting funds and even fuels to regional chairman and vice chairman so that these people cannot carry out their work. Mr. Speaker, they're even going so far and changing secretaries and other staff that's assigned to these people without their knowledge. That is the kind of interference, Mr. Speaker, we are talking about. Mr. Speaker, because of the lack of experience and the attitude of these people, a number of regions were unable to expend their budget. For example, Mr. Speaker, Region 2, $79 million came back to the Treasury. Region 3, Mr. Speaker, $97 million. Region 5, Mr. Speaker, $109 million. And Region 6, Mr. Speaker, $66 million. And Mr. Speaker, these money could have been expended, but what? Because of the attitude, because of sidelining experienced people, they were unable and they have no experience to expend these money. And these money, Mr. Speaker, these money were budgeted to buy basic things, for example, drugs. You go to the New Amsterdam hospital today, there are shortage of basic drugs. You go to the dental clinic in Port Moran, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you go to the dental clinic in Port Moran, there is no cocaine to do teeth extraction. That is the kind of way this government wants to run the regions, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I want to make an appeal. I want to make an appeal to this honorable house that they should allow democracy to prevail and the region should be controlled by the elected officials. Mr. Speaker, I want to touch on two other very, very important sectors. These sectors, Mr. Speaker, these sectors, Mr. Speaker, I want to say something. Mott and Jeff can go to the sugar worker today. Mott and Jeff can go to the sugar worker today, but not the man who's swelling up his chest. Wanted to go and he was refused and chased away by the sugar worker, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, two sectors in this country I want to talk about. And these two sectors, Mr. Speaker, are being treated as stepchildren by this government. And I am referring to, Mr. Speaker, to the rice and sugar sectors. Mr. Speaker, in the APNU AFC manifesto, it is stated, and I quote, that is rice. This sector is ingrained in the fabric of coastal rural Guyana, from the Corentyne to the Essequibo. Engage over 12,000 farmers, supports an additional 10% of the country's population directly and many more indirectly, unquote.
Honorable, we have 3 minutes remaining.
And Mr. Speaker, this government is today disowning the rice industry, Mr. Speaker. Disowning the farmers of this country, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, high official from this government went on television and made promises to the farmers that they will get $6,000 to $9,000 a bag per body. Mr. Speaker, today the farmers have got no markets. The farmers have got no markets. And Mr. Speaker, this government will destroy the rice industry. And Mr. Speaker, remember in 1992 when we took government, rice production was a mere 171,000 tons. When we left government last year, Mr. Speaker, the rice production went over 680,000 tons. So they continue destroying this industry, Mr. Speaker, but we as a party will not allow them this time. Their days are numbered. Their days are numbered. Mr. Speaker, we have heard a lot about sugar. But let us talk first about the sugar workers. The sugar workers, according to the Minister of Finance, the sugar sector has achieved its target for 2015. And yet in 31 years, Mr. Speaker, the sugar worker didn't receive an increase. for the first time in 31 years, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member, you have 1 minute remaining to wrap up.
Mr. Speaker, I want to say that this budget has failed the Guyanese nation. The minister should go back and come with the right team for this budget, Mr. Speaker. Instead of stimulating growth, it's stifling growth. Mr. Speaker, instead of restoring confidence, it has removed the confidence of the Guyanese people. And Mr. Speaker, the good life does not beckon for the Guyanese people. It beckons for the ministers over that side. The good life berries for the Guyanese people with this budget, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
I thank the honourable member for his statement. The next speaker is the Honourable Hemraj Ramkumar. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much.